Hey everybody, it's Boo-Ray Perry from Tampa, Florida, and I just went live on YouTube, and then when I looked at the live video, I realized that my microphone wasn't working, and so now I'm having to do this all the traditional way and not be live. So if you saw my live video, and you're wondering why it's not there anymore, it's because I was in such a rush to get on YouTube that my technical savvy was not too good. I was not too technically savvy on the video, so I wanted to do this again and make a regular video because we need good audio. So I want to talk about the Sony A9III because Petapixel just ran a story announcing the Sony A9III and what is going to be in this camera from Sony. This will be a new flagship camera for Sony. And when I read through this, Gary Hughes, who I used to do my podcast with, he sent it to me. He's like, this is game changing. You need to look at this. And so I did, and man, is he right. If everything that they say is going to happen in this camera happens in this camera, the 10th anniversary of the Sony Alpha 7, then it's going to change photography. Like, seriously change photography. And what's really interesting to me is that it's going to change portrait photography. This camera is not really built for portrait photography. It's built for sports, but it will absolutely change portrait photography. So here's what I'm talking about. The camera is going to have a global shutter, a full-frame global shutter. So what that means is if you know much about how the shutters work on modern cameras, the shutter opens, the shutter closes, right? Shutter opens, shutter closes. And then if you want a really, really fast shutter speed, then you go to the electronic shutter. And with the electronic shutter, the shutter is always open, the sensor is exposed, and the sensor just turns itself off and on, or rather on and off to get the picture. And the problem is that the sensor does not read all the pixels at the same time. It reads them in a series, like the first row, then the next row, then the next row, so it cycles. And it cycles sometimes as slow as a 15th of a second. So what this does is it gives you something called rolling shutter. So if you've ever used an electronic shutter on a camera and taken a picture of something like, say, an airplane propeller, or I actually made a video about this where I took a picture of the ceiling fan in my house, you get a rolling shutter. You get this warped look to the shutter. So it gives and it takes away because you've got a camera that is giving you an electronic shutter with a super high shutter speed. However, if you're taking a picture of something that's moving really, really fast, it doesn't work for you. And when you're taking a picture of something that works really, really fast, that's when you need a really fast shutter speed. Right? So it's a catch-22. Well, a global shutter image sensor, the whole sensor turns on and off at the same speed, at the same time. So you lose all rolling shutter. You also lose flicker if you've got flickering lights. This is not something I've never really had a problem with, but other people, especially like, say, I would imagine shooting, say, sports, basketball, something like that, that the flickering of the lights will be a problem because of the on and off nature of the sensor. Nope, this is going to be gone. So you've got a global shutter. What that means on this camera is that you will be able to shoot at 120 frames per second with no rolling shutter. But it gets better than that. They say, I've got the story right in front of me. I want to make sure I've got it right. They say the maximum shooting speed of this camera will be 1/80,000th of a second. And they're going to bootstrap it down to 1/16,000th of a second. That'll be the fastest you can go on the camera. But here's the line. Here's the line that just blew me out of the water when I read it in the story. There will be no flash sync speed. If you're a portrait photographer and you work outside and you work in bright environments, as we do on the beach here in Florida, flash sync speed is a big, big deal. Because you're working on the beach and it's bright and you're shooting with natural light. And so your shutter speed is going to be really, really high because you want to be able to use the full range on your aperture, set your aperture to whatever you want it to. You want a shallow depth of field? Let's set the aperture at f2 or f2.8. The shutter speed is going to jump way up to 4,000ths of a second to knock down the light for me. That's fine. We're rocking. The minute you take out a flash, the minute you put a flash on the camera or a flash off camera, you are now at the limitation of the flash sync speed in the camera. And the flash sync speed on most cameras is about 1/200th of a second or 1/250th of a second. And when you're working on a bright day and you're shooting at 1,000ths of a second or 2,000ths of a second, to suddenly have it be, oh, sorry, you can't go above 1/250 is a huge limitation. People say, what about high-speed sync? The problem with high-speed sync is that as you go into high-speed sync mode, the camera has to strobe, and by strobing it loses power. So when you use high-speed sync, you lose flash power. And if you so what this means is that when you're working in a bright environment and you're trying to get a shallow depth of field, you're trying to knock down the sun and knock down the environment and light them with a flash, that you almost never are going to get full power out of your flash. Because if you're using high-speed sync, your flash is going to be cut down. If you're not using high-speed sync, you're going to have to change your aperture in order to get the light down where you want it to be. And every time you change the aperture to a higher aperture number, making the hole smaller, you're cutting down the amount of light getting in the camera, which is cutting down the power from the flash. So this is a big deal if you do this kind of work. To remove the flash sync speed completely from a camera and then say, hey, would you like to shoot at 1/16,000th of a second with full flash power from your little flash that's on top of the camera or off camera? This is huge. This is a game changer. And this camera is not even built for portrait photography. It's built for sports. It's got a big grip. You're supposed to be holding it all day, big lens, right? That's what it's really built for. But it will be game changing for portrait photographers, people who work on the beach in bright light like I do. I mean, this is just a limitation that we've always dealt with. It's like if somebody's just suddenly said, oh, by the way, every lens from now on is going to be an f1 lens with no distortion and no purple fringing. Yeah, no problem. They're just all going to be that way from now on. That's what they're doing here by getting rid of the flash sync speed. Right? I mean, I really can't stress enough how much the flash sync speed has been the bane of my existence, my entire career as a photographer here in Florida. And to say to me, that's going to be gone? Not going to be a problem anymore? I mean, what are the other camera manufacturers going to do? Right? This is going to be the new bar. I assume it will be. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe for you, you're like, I don't even know what you're talking about. Flash sync speed has never been a problem for me. So maybe I'm a small group. But for my group, man, this is huge. It's a 24.6 megapixel CMOS sensor. It takes 4 cards. It will shoot 120 frames per second with full autofocus, automatic exposure tracking, and metering, 0 distortion. When you take a picture with it, it's actually recording for 1 second before you pull the shutter. So if you're late pulling the shutter, that's okay. It records for a second before. You would have to be using high-speed shooting. So like if you pull the trigger for 120 frames per second, it's actually starting a second back. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, it's starting a second back. So you get like 240 frames. It would be last second and this second. I'm guessing that's the way that this is going to work. Wow. Blackout-free shooting at 120 frames per second. The EVF will refresh at 120 frames per second. This is nuts. It really is. I don't understand how they can do it at this price point. The price point is $6,000. 15 years ago, the best Canon camera was the 1D, and that camera was more than $6,000. This camera will be a Lamborghini compared to the 1D's Ford Pinto at this point, and it will be cheaper, despite the fact that we've had global inflation. I mean, I just don't know how they can do it. Who comes out with cheaper cameras? Not Sony, but they are here. Wow. My prediction here is going to be one of two things are going to happen. Either it's going to come out and there will be some people who are just gaga over it, but there'll be a small group. Everyone else will be like, hey, yeah, great, but it's a $6,000 camera, and I don't need a $6,000 camera. I'm not going to buy a $6,000 camera, right? That's one prediction. The other prediction is it will come out and suddenly this will be the camera to have, period. I don't care what you do. I don't care what you shoot. There's always one camera on the market that people are like, if you say you have that camera, it's like, what kind of watch do you wear? I wear a Rolex. Maybe not anymore, but there was a time when if you're like, what kind of watch do you wear? I wear a Rolex. End of discussion. Mic drop. I've just stated the best there is, and so there's no discussion now about other watches because I wear the best watch there is. And I wonder if that's what will happen with this camera when it comes out. It'll just be like, oh, well, Sony A9III is what I shoot with. Oh, okay. Excuse me for asking. Because you're using the best camera ever made. Is that going to happen? I don't know. I want to know what you think, so jump in the comments, please, and let me know how you feel about this, because it just seems to me like this may be a seismic shift in cameras, where we see now that every camera that comes out has to have a global shutter. Think about when no camera had in-body image stabilization, when nobody had IBIS, right? And then it came out, huge deal, and now if you look at a camera and it doesn't have IBIS, you're like, what? How can it not have IBIS? Is that going to happen here? Has Sony really changed the game moving forward? I don't know. What do you think? Get in the comments and let me know. Also, be sure and jump over to my website, BluRayPerry.com. I put the link down in the description because down there you will be able to go to the website and see everything that I offer, including my free ebooks. I have some free ebooks. I have some purchasable ebooks as well, some videos. I do one-on-one coaching. If you want some one-on-one, I can really get you over the hump with photography and do it quickly with one-on-one coaching. It's all there on my website, so be sure and check it out. Also, be sure and follow me on Instagram, follow me on Threads, join my group on Facebook, which is called Pro Photo Talk with Blu-ray Perry, and throw me a like. Yeah, throw me a like and throw me a subscribe, and thanks for watching. It's a big day.